right, hello everybody. Happy Thursday, May 6th. Hopefully everyone is feeling okay post Cinco de Mayo. Hopefully everyone enjoyed their day yesterday. We'll give it a few minutes as folks roll in here. All right, let's get it started here. So for those of you who have been with us for a while, welcome back. For any new members, clients who are joining us, I'm Bill Rabbit, one of the co-founders of CFS. We welcome you. And as a reminder, these office hours are, for you guys and gals. Open forum, any questions you may have that you want answered by myself and Matt Carpenter, who should be joining us. He's running a little bit late, but pop those in the Q&A. Again, all questions you want to have addressed, pop them in the Q&A as opposed to the chat, and that's how we'll kind of funnel through them. So fire away with any questions there. So, as we dig in here, taking a step back and taking a look at where we're at, right? And very, very different spaces in terms of, if you're, a senior family versus say a junior family or underclassmen, right? So it's interesting that we're just past May 1st, right? Because for you seniors, although you're not quite officially at the finish line, which we'll kind of talk about that process today, you're very, very close to the finish line. Okay. Whereas, juniors and underclassmen, but specifically juniors, class of 2022, you can make the argument that you're kind of right at the starting line. Hopefully you've done, and even if you're a freshman, sophomore family, there's a lot of planning and preparation that you could do, but typically, around this time is when juniors, start to feel the hair on fire a little bit. This is when we go out to the high schools and we start doing our financial aid webinars and workshops for junior families, because now we probably, if you're able to take a test, SAT or SAT, and we'll spend some time talking about that as well today. If you have those, you're starting to probably research some schools. If you're being proactive, if you're leveraging some of our resources, we're starting to understand what schools potentially are going to be on the list. So we're going to talk about both of those scenarios today, kind of our class of 2021s, class of 2022s, and underclassmen, because we certainly want to be speaking to the whole audience. Okay, so we have a few questions coming in, but let me just kind of give some kind of high level context to those two kind of categories there. So for our class of 2021s, right, we're post May 1st. May 1st is kind of the universal deadline for kind of housing deposits. And we probably have talked about this a bit over the past few weeks leading up to it. But again, one of the only universal deadlines, your housing deposit or deposit to the school, which more or less makes it official that, hey, this is the school that my son or daughter is going to be attending next year. Okay, so congratulations to everyone who've made it to this point. Quite a bit has happened since this time last year on many different levels, specifically here with the college process. So congratulations first and foremost to making it this far, navigating this roller coaster and making your school selection. So what I would do, and actually it's a practice that we do internally at CFS, and we do it on a weekly basis, but sharing wins. So if you feel comfortable and you want to share some wins, you can leverage actually the chat feature here if you want to go ahead and share any wins that you had, any perspective, if you want to share where your son or daughter got accepted or where they committed, I encourage you to do that. Of course, it's no obligation, but it's a big accomplishment for not only the student but the parent as well, right? This is quite a bit of a roller coaster emotionally, mentally, physically, things like that. So congratulations there. So May 1st, and for many families, we've gone through the process. We have our school. We know that what school we're going to be dealing with. Now we're at the point, okay, well, we don't yet have the bill. We have the financial aid award, so we kind of know what our cost of attendance, our net cost is going to be for the first year, but we don't have the actual bill from the school. Okay, so what we can expect here is that usually in and around June 1st, okay, give or take, it's school by school. Some are a little bit more proactive than others. That's when you're going to get the bill from the school. Okay, and this is until then. You won't know down to the exact penny what exactly the out-of-pocket cost is going to be. It's going to be very close to anything that the school sent over previously, or what CAP is projecting in terms of the cost. But these schools are still working out what exactly their bottom line is going to be for next year. So you'll get that come June. And that's going to reflect, the financial aid that was offered. Okay, so, and how these bills are broken down is you're going to get semester bills. So the first bill that you'll get in June, it's going to typically be due August 1st. It's going to reflect the cost for the first semester. Okay, so, and then the financial aid is going to be deployed for that first semester. So, some schools will do this breakdown for you. Other schools will say, just here's the full cost of attendance. Here's your, full financial aid award. And in that case, what's going to happen is that, the half of the cost is going to be billed for the first semester. Half of that financial aid is going to be deployed for the first semester. Okay. And then you'll get your next bill in December, typically due in and around June 1st. Okay. So that's, just sort of a timeline standpoint. So I'm going to go ahead and we got some questions rolling in here. So let me address those. So we have a question regarding a student receiving federal work study, and should you accept it or not? Okay. So, quick notes and context on work study. Okay. The way that work study is presented on the financial aid, and that's, the colleges consider work study financial aid, and it's presented on the financial aid award to you. But work study is not something that necessarily is free money, where it's coming off the top and coming off your bill. Okay, so work study is that if it's been offered, the student has the ability to have preference to get an on-campus job, so they can go, and it's very flexible. There's certain hours, and more or less it's a small, non-labor intensive part-time job where they can sort of earn money. Typically, that money, students will use for kind of spending money, books, things like that. At some schools, you can arrange for that work study to get put towards your balance at the school. But typically the work study is, a handful of hours each week. That student gets kind of a check, and they have that ability to, use that money as they see fit. So work study is completely optional. Okay. So it's not, if you feel like, your son or daughter is in a position, hey, this is a huge transition. First year going into college, a lot of things to consider, and, getting settled, things like that. Adding sort of a small part-time-ish job into the mix might be a little too much. You could decline. So that's totally fine. And further context, however, is, it's sort of another activity. When I went to college, I played football, Division II football at Stonehill College. So, my schedule was quite demanding in terms of, obviously the day-to-day class schedule, and then practice every day, games on the weekends, things like that. So it was, but I participated in the federal work study program, and it was only a handful of hours, and usually it was like a Friday evening, sat at the front desk of the SPOCO, the sports complex there, checked IDs, and that was it. And it was just a little bit of spending money. So not super labor intensive, but it's completely optional. All right. So if I do not need to take the subsidized and unsubsidized federal loans, but I am eligible for them, should I take them and accept them? Okay. So this is speaking to the federal direct student loan. Okay. Now, the fact that you were awarded a subsidized portion of that federal student loan indicates to me that there's a level of need that was demonstrated there, right? And again, just for quick, and this might be good for the underclassmen, but the cost of attendance or the sticker price less your family's EFC, you have need there, right? So that's usually the indicator of a school offering a subsidized portion. Now, whether it's subsidized or unsubsidized, this is a loan, right? And the way we describe it here is, for the grand slam or the ideal scenario when it comes to undergrad, right, specifically, is that there's no borrowing required, right? No matter how you borrow, it's still borrowing. You're paying points on that money. The next best thing is limiting borrowing. So call it, that's the grand slam. The home run is, and still a home run is, if you can limit your undergraduate borrowing to just the $27,000 of the federal direct student loan. So anything under $27,000. So, that is still, that's the money, and the agreement is only between the government and the student. The parents are not on that. And $27,000, is a very good amount and responsible amount of undergraduate debt to have, and very manageable in terms of payments moving forward. Now, what I would say here is, although we're kind of, spotlighting and focusing in on paying the bill for year one, we want to be mindful of the 4-year kind of piece of this. So with the federal direct student loan, it's a use or lose it program, right? It's $5,500 freshman year, sophomore year, $6,500, $7,500, $7,500. The total is $27,000. So if borrowing is anywhere on that landscape, we want to maximize this loan program. Okay. Even if that means, hey, we might not have to borrow until senior year. Okay. We may want to still accept these loans, especially the subsidized portion. Okay. And that is an option as well. You can opt to only take the subsidized portion and opt not to go with the unsubsidized. Okay. And what's strategic about that is the subsidized portion is 0% interest while the student's in college, right? So you could take that money. It's not coming out of your pocket. It's not depleting, 529 or any resources, and you're not paying any points on that. So at the very least, if you're offered a subsidized loan, I would, and again, there's everyone's situation is different, is, accepting that subsidized portion, declining the unsub, and that way you kind of have that money for free. And then, after that 4th year, upon graduation, there's a 6-month kind of buffer before, the first payments have to be made. You can then pay off that, pay off the subsidized portion at the end of the 4 years, again, before any interest accrues. So that way you're not paying any points on that. So, those are the things to consider. And then, on top of that, need-based financial aid is a year-to-year process. So if you got a need-based grant, you're going to have to reapply for need-based financial aid every year. And typically, if things are, if things remain the same, from income asset standpoint, your financial aid award, you can expect to be the same. Now, again, nobody has a crystal ball, but based on some of the experience in the past that we've come by, where we've had a situation where we've had a couple of clients where, they got need-based grant, right, in say the first year, and it was a small amount, right? It was a small amount, and then there was, a significant change in the circumstance, whether it was, a decrease in income or job loss, what have you. So in going back to the next year, we submitted those forms. We got the financial aid award. It wasn't as good as we would expect, so we issued an appeal. And one of the places that the college looked in terms of the appeal was, hey, did this family take all of the financial aid that we did offer them, including the sub and unsub? And that was a part of their kind of assessment. So just a couple of those things to keep in mind. Obviously, if you can pay for this thing without borrowing, that's ideal. If you limit it to under the $27,000, the federal direct student loan, that's still a home run. And then to get very granular, if you just wanted to take the subsidized portion of that each year, you can do that. I think this is a follow-up here, but I have to accept or decline financial aid and need help to make sure I am good. So, well, that's a good point, right? So, as far as accepting declining financial aid, okay, so for most of you class of 2021 parents, right, the financial aid award comes and then you indicate, do you want to accept or decline? Now, any grants or scholarships are assumed to be accepted, right? So in this case, if you have to go ahead and accept or decline, you can go ahead and accept that and say, yes, I'm going to take, let's say in this case, just the subsidized portion. So we accept the subsidized, decline the unsubsidized. That doesn't mean that money, that's the end of the road there. In order to officially have the federal direct student loan here, get that money dispersed from the federal government to the college, there is still a quote unquote application process. Okay, so this is really just an indicator to the college. It's not necessarily binding you, because what's going to happen, and we're going to do a whole presentation on this, in the next couple of weeks, but in order to secure that federal direct student loan, the student has to do two things. It's fairly easy, is an entrance counseling. It's more or less like a 20-minute kind of tutorial on the fact that they're entering into a borrowing agreement with the government. Really just a formality, no right or wrong answers, check that box. And then there's what's called a master promissory note. That more or less is the application. It's just signing off saying, hey, I promise to pay this thing back. So until those two things are done, you really haven't fully accepted that money. Okay, so if for a fact, hey, listen, we're doing this without borrowing, and you can go ahead and decline it. If you're still kind of considering it, you go ahead and accept the student loan, and then you still have time to figure out, okay, is this something we were going to do? If yes, you go ahead and take those measures. If not, you just don't follow through on that, and then that'll be reflected on your bill. How do you withdraw money from 529s? So good question here. So it depends on if you're working with a money manager. That's the first place you would go. Talk to your financial advisor, your CFP, what have you, your money manager, and say, hey, listen, school's coming up. It's time to start to draw on the 529. And then they'll walk you through that process. It's fairly painless. And then if we're talking about working with an advisor, they'll just have kind of their particular steps on doing that. If you don't have a money manager, it's whoever you set up that 529 with. And typically it's, you set it up with your state's organization. There's exceptions, but for example, I'm here in New Jersey. The 529 here is set up through Franklin Templeton. So I would log into my account and then follow the steps to make a withdrawal there. So I think generally speaking, it's a pretty intuitive process. Okay. Even beyond the federal sub and unsub loans, we are going to have to take some additional loans. What are the pros cons of taking the loans in the parent's name versus the student's name? Interest rates, tax considerations. So this is a great question. I'm going to give you the cliff notes here with, maybe get a little granular, because in the next couple of weeks, probably at the end of this month, we're going to be talking specifically about the pros and cons of each program, okay? And specifically for borrowing on top of that federal direct student loan, okay? And the reason why we wait until the end of May, sometimes even the very beginning of June, is because, believe it or not, for the federal government, for the state organizations, they don't have the rates and the terms set for the next school year. So, if we're going to be shopping around, borrowing is a last resort, but we do want to shop around, make sure we're getting the best deal. We want to wait to make a decision and take action until we know kind of the rates and terms that, we're going to be dealing with here. But from a high level, we have and again, this is specifically to borrowing beyond that federal direct student loan. And for the first year, again, is $5,500. We can borrow through the federal government through their parent borrowing program, which is the PLUS loan. Okay. We have the option to borrow through state organizations. Okay. And I'll kind of go into detail there, or we could go through the private route, which a private route would be, say, like a Sallie Mae or a Wells Fargo, something like that. So from a high level, pros and cons, the Parent Plus loan, it's the most lenient in terms of, getting approval. It's very quick, and it probably will take a matter of 20 minutes total to kind of get approval. And then, the quick turnaround time is around 72 hours or 3 or 4 days before that money gets dispersed to the school. So, those are the pros with the PLUS loan. Super easy. And one of the biggest things is credit worthiness. Now, for each of these levels, right, Fed, state, private, approval hinges based off of credit worthiness or credit score. And the PLUS loan, you don't need great credit, as long as you don't have, as they say, adverse credit, you can expect approval for the PLUS loan. So if credit is sort of a concern, the PLUS loan usually is kind of the first place to take a look, because it's, the easiest when it comes to approval. 1 second. So the cons are, the rates usually aren't, great. It's, again, they're not set for the upcoming year, but we're looking around 7%. It's a fixed rate. So for some, that is a big pro. Okay. So, whether you choose to defer payments on the PLUS loan or not, it's not going to change the rate. There's kind of a hefty origination fee, 4%, traditionally. So the PLUS loan and the PLUS loan has some pros, and you have a bunch of consumer protection with the federal programs, right? The most consumer protection. So by that, I mean, they offer different repayment plans. They offer what's called income-based repayment plans, which, after kind of the dust is settled and you're going to get into repayment, you can hinge your repayments based off of your income, not necessarily what, the true balance would be. Okay. So this is important to consider, if you're, moderate to low income, or, you're expecting to have a low income kind of years down the road, this can be quite effective. So you get those kind of levels of protection. There are some loan forgiveness programs at the federal level. So, there's that to be mindful of too. We'll kind of go into detail on that, when we present on this. So, the PLUS loan, if you call the financial aid office and say, hey, listen, I need to figure out how to pay for this, they're going to say, go take a Parent Plus loan. Many times turns out to be the right solution. But in my opinion, it's a little irresponsible because to point someone to the only option where we're borrowing here, we want to look at least everything before we kind of decide. So the other option is the state. And, not every state has a borrowing program. I'm in New Jersey. New Jersey has a fairly good one called the NJ Class Loans. So as long as you live in New Jersey and or if you're out of state and are attending school in New Jersey, you're eligible to borrow through here. And, there's different levels of repayment here where you can choose to make immediate repayments on this loan, okay, where you're making full interest and principal payments. And in choosing that, you're going to get rewarded with a lower rate. So if that's something that you're comfortable with, I think last year was probably around 4.5%, 5% if you chose that option. If you're a family where that's what your intention is, well, then that state loan program is probably going to be a better option as opposed to the plus loan that's at 7%. You can, at the state level, you can choose interest only payments, right? So we're kind of keeping that interest from kind of compounding and snowballing out of control. You're not going to get as good of a rate. They're going to bump that up a little bit, but last year I believe it was still a little bit better than at the federal level. And then you could choose a full deferment where you're not obligated to make any payments, but the interest is accruing the entire time. Okay. And that's the case with the Parent Plus loan as well. You can choose a deferment. They're not going to ding you on the rate. It is what it is, but the interest is accruing all the time. Okay. So, there's different ways to slice and dice it. And when we present sort of all the pros and cons, usually one speaks to the family in terms of what makes sense. Now at the state level, the other thing to consider is, if your student is, going to school out of state and your state doesn't necessarily have their own loan program, you can check and see if that state where they're attending school has one. So for example, if my son went to college up in Massachusetts, their organization is MIFA, they have a loan program, he'd be eligible to borrow through there. So at the very least, I want to see what rates and options that they're kind of rolling out there to make my decision. Okay. From a high level at the private sector, Sallie Mae, Wells Fargo, there's dozens and dozens of options. We kind of proceed down that route with caution. And many times, we advise against it if you don't have superb credit. So, really like high 700s, 800s, because the rate that they offer you will hinge off of that. So if you have great credit, they're probably going to give you a very competitive rate, maybe around 4%. And again, don't hold me to it. It changes year to year. We don't know moving forward. But if you have average to like below average credit, you can see rates as high as 10, 11%. Okay. So we want to be cautious of that. Now, you can go to say Sallie Mae now, you could do sort of a pre-approval. They'll run a credit check and they'll offer you those terms if you're curious, without, having to make the commitment. So I would advise, and sorry, I'm going on this long winded kind of student loan thing is because it's important. It's a last resort, but we want to do it strategically. So we don't want to take any action until we kind of have all the facts. So, and again, I'm glad I said that out loud because, getting financing for student loans here is not even, it's very quick, especially as compared to say getting a mortgage or even a personal loan, right? Usually just online applications and it's a kind of credit check. And usually you get your approval kind of instantly. So it's not this long kind of drawn out process that's, completely miserable, like getting a line of credit on your home or, getting a mortgage. So, waiting, let's say you get the bill June 1st and that bill is due August 1st, that it actually is plenty of time to kind of secure financing. Now, with that in mind, I'll just put a disclaimer that if you are a family that, your credit is in rough shape, right? you may want to start to consider reaching out to someone who would be willing to co-sign these loans. Okay, again, this is last resort, but that's going to be necessary if that is in fact the case. Okay. And what is the interest rate on the unsubsidized loan? So the interest rate, again, is for the unsubsidized loan. It changes every year. It's going to be in around 5%, 5.5%. We'll see what gets rolled out this year, but that's usually where it lands. Which, listen, it's not great, but it's not 7-8% like the plus loan. And again, I think it's important to understand here too, right? So there's no prepayment penalties on any of these loans. So, many times families just want the peace of mind knowing that, okay, come hell or high water, we got to kick this can down the road. We know that all the bills are going to be paid. The students can be able to register for classes and go, right? So what families may do is they'll borrow the full amount for the year. Okay. And usually in that case, this is how I would advise it. So let's say you got to come up with there's a $40,000 balance that you got to come up with for the school year. And, you're not going to be able to write checks for $20,000 twice or $40,000 in one batch, but you want that peace of mind and flexibility, knowing, okay, all the bills are paid. What you're giving up is that, okay, the interest is going to be accruing on that money, but there's no prepayment penalty. So let's say, all right, we can't come up with 40 grand this year, but we feel confident we can come up with 10 or 15. So it requires discipline, but prepay those loans by the amount that you actually can afford, if you can. So that way we're not only keeping that interest from compounding, but we're starting to chip away at the principal, right? So kind of minimizing that impact. Let's see here. Okay, so we have a question regarding a co-op. Congratulations, by the way, on the acceptance to Drexel. We received scholarships and grants. They have a 6-month co-op. Yeah, so the co-op situation, it can be a little confusing, but for the co-ops, and again, each school can run their co-op programs, differently, but more or less, the student during that time is working for that, company or what have you. Okay, so that particular period of time where they're in the co-op, it's treated differently that is if they're attending school like a traditional student. So the costs are going to be a little bit different, but and with those lower costs, the student is going to be earning some income through that co-op program. Again, depending on how that school runs their co-op program. So sorry, I can't be more specific there. I would start by understanding kind of how they run their co-op program, what that does to, your out-of-pocket costs, and what does that look like in terms of income for the student. But generally speaking, we're big fans of co-op programs. If we hear about a waitlisted school through the summer, and that would be our top choice, but we have accepted admissions offer at another school, how should we handle the federal loan acceptance at the school we have committed to? Really good question here. And what's interesting too this year is this is the first year where colleges can make offers to students after May 1st. Traditionally it was once May 1st happens, it's sort of game over. Schools can't, reach out or anything like that. You made your decision. Wait list is a little bit different, but in this case where someone's selected off the wait list, what'll happen is, you'll likely lose the deposit that you sent to the school you committed to. You could argue with the school in terms of getting a refund, but the expectation is you kind of lose out on that deposit, which, could be anywhere from $300 to $800 or so, depending on the school. When it comes to the loan, that's fine. That's just a matter of having a conversation with the colleges, okay, where they'll more or less kind of rewire that money, and likely you may be required to just go create a new master promissory note for the student. So the student, in doing the master promissory note, you indicate the college, right, that you're attending. And why you do that is because then the college gets notified. They confirm, yes, in fact, the student is coming here. So that there's the connection. So really what will happen is probably a new master promissory note will be required. You'll have to contact both financial aid offices, but that's totally doable. And then, the bill will be reflected as such. Will the income earned by the student in the co-op work against him in assessing financial need? So, the short answer is yes. It's usually and again, depending on how the co-op is run, they're paid like a W-2 employee, so like a W-2, they're going to have to file taxes on that. So they have a personal federal tax return. And again, it depends on the co-op program, but, usually that earned income doesn't move the needle tremendously. And then, you could always make that argument in an appeal to the financial aid office. But from kind of top line, yes, that income comes into play. But usually it's not an amount that's going to dramatically move the needle. And if it is the case, you can kind of engage in a conversation with the school appeal wise. Let's see here. Now we have a question regarding 529. Do you just take from the 529 as you need? Okay, so if I understand correctly, so the answer there is yes, right? So let's say if you have $100,000 in a 529, you're looking at a bill from the school for 20,000. You would only take that 20,000 and pay the bill. You wouldn't withdraw the full 100. So yes, you take it as you need. All right, gonna take a little bit of a breather here. Just give folks a couple of minutes if they have any other questions. Question here, going back to work study, if you decline the work study for this year, for the reasons I mentioned, can you accept it? Can you be offered it and accept it in, next follow-up years? And the answer is yes. Need-based aid is, year to year. The FAFSA has to be submitted each year, and each year on the FAFSA, you'll indicate that you're interested in work study. So again, going back to the federal student loan for freshman year, the federal, you can't decline and then accept. So Andrea, you can decline the full federal direct student loan in year one. The student will be offered that loan the next year, so as long as the FAFSA is is completed. So you can fully decline it this year, be offered it next year, and accept. So question with regard to 529 and the timing of pulling it out. You know, again, this is very, I have to kind of talk broad strokes, and everyone's strategy is different. Okay. But usually when it comes to the timing of 529s and being very careful, usually that is a conversation when, grandparent might have 529 or a relative might have a 529. And in that case, you might want to hold off on using that monies till, say, junior or senior year. But if it's, you're the parent, it's your 529, it's completely fine to kind of front load that, especially if the alternative is borrowing. How late can you accept the federal student loans? Does it need to be before school starts? There's no specific deadline for the federal student loans or even the Parent Plus loans. But again, from a timeline standpoint, you'll get your bill in June. That first bill is due August 1st. So, you'd ideally want to take care of that to be reflected in by the time August 1st rolls around. So that way you don't have any sort of balance on your bill there. And again, we're going to be talking through this in detail. You don't have to worry about doing it, this week or next by any means. There's quite a bit of time. So, again, from a timing standpoint, you'll just want to make sure that you kind of have your strategy in place and acted upon. So, it's reflected on the bill by August 1st. So if you filled out the FAFSA, will the school communicate the loan options as part of the financial aid package? Or do we have to go and secure that loan without prompting from the school? So on the financial aid packages, most of you senior parents, they usually put the federal direct student loan. So you'll see the $5,500 for the student, and then some will indicate plus loan and a balance to fund the gap there. The schools aren't really going to give you any information about, the state organizations or the private organizations, things like that. So kind of the due diligence and shopping around is on you, but, obviously you have us to leverage on, and we're going to get you educated on all those options. But in terms of securing those loans, so, usually when it comes to the student loans, many colleges will send out an email. Typically it's directly to the student. Okay. Say, hey, you have to do the interest counseling or the promissory note to make sure you secure this. Some will include some directions, some won't. But again, on that front, we're going to be sending out detailed sort of information on, hey, if you're taking the federal direct student loan, here's kind of your how-to, and then what we put together, which probably is our best YouTube video, has the most views out there, but we'll be updating that and sending that out to everyone, is sort of a quick guide to completing the entrance counseling and master promissory note for the student in 5 minutes. So you'll be getting information on us, and we'll be coaching you through that. So another 529 question in terms of taking a tax hit or a penalty if you don't use the money in a certain time frame. If you're going to be tapping that 529, it's going to be because you have an immediate action item, right? You have a bill, so you're going to go get that 529, and you're going to be using that. So in some ways, I don't see that being an issue, but that's really, talk to your money manager, talk to the financial institution you have the 529 with, kind of to get a better understanding of those taxes or penalties. The main penalty is, withdrawing 529 money for non-educational purposes. Again, there's kind of a institution by institution. Usually it's pretty lenient, but that's really the penalty. The only penalty that to truly be mindful of is, 529 withdrawals and making sure those are used for qualified educational expenses. Unsubsidized loan, in terms of building the student's credit, if you pay it off over each of the 4 years. That's and for some folks, that's a strategy they employ, whether it's the unsubsidized loan or the subsidized federal direct student loan. Main reason is because that is an agreement between the federal government and the student, right? There's no co-signers or nothing like that. So we've had clients in the past who had the ability to, pay fully out of pocket. They didn't have to borrow, but they chose to secure the full $5,500, and then, right on disbursement, because upon disbursement is when the meter starts running on any interest. They just paid it off completely, and they did that each of the 4 years, with the mindset that after those 4 years and those loans being paid off, we're establishing some credit in the student's name. All right. So these are fantastic questions, by the way. It's kind of exactly the questions that will bubble up at this point in the journey, at least for the class of 2021. And again, kind of the taking a step back and kind of harvesting here is that if borrowing is anywhere on the radar, right, we're going to start with that $5,500, the federal direct student loan, and then there's action items to secure that. Entrance counseling, master promissory note. We're going to be sending out information on how to execute that in the most effective way. You don't have to do that, immediately, but we just want to make sure that, usually getting that process started, towards the middle end of this month, certainly at the beginning of June. So that way it's reflected on the August bill. Okay. Any borrowing that's required on top of that, we want to be a bit patient, for a few reasons. One, we're going to start to really talk about in detail and likely have, a specific webinar dedicated to that, the pros and cons of each, and getting into strategy on how to deploy effectively 529s, when to use what type of asset, things like that. But we're holding off until we have all the information, specifically rates and terms for these loans for the upcoming school year. So in some ways we're sitting on our hands a little bit. So that's why we can only talk these sort of high level pros and cons. But this sort of this is kind of a good start in terms of having that mentality. And with that said, I think this is a good time. And I think I probably was the one to mention this a couple of weeks ago. Is that borrowing is last resort. So a general concept is if we can minimize it or push it off for as long as we can, right? So I know this is broad strokes, but again, we're going to talk in detail about best ways to deploy assets and when. But those are the general concepts, and you do have the ability to borrow the full cost, right? The full amount that it costs to go to school. You're going to have that ability to do that. If the case is, you're going to need to borrow to make this happen in full, you can borrow up to the amount that it costs to go to college. And actually they even allot for a couple $1,000s more than just what the bill will have from the school, because they know that you may need some resources for things like books and travel, things like that. So they even, from a borrowing standpoint, they allot for a couple $1,000s extra, beyond just the direct cost from the college. Question here. I would assume over the next 4 years, there is a need to stay in a similar financial space. That's it's a bit of a tough question here. You know, again, no one has a crystal ball, and if you have control over that, that's a different story. But I guess generally speaking, need-based aid, right? That's directly impacted by year to year by income and assets. If we're talking about merit scholarships have no impact from income or assets. So that's kind of a different conversation. And if your son or daughter is attending a school where there was no need-based aid, they got a merit scholarship, if you have the ability to dial up your financial situation, by all means. With need-based financial aid, yes, I understand that concern. It's just a matter of, do you have the ability to dial it up or dial it down? But need-based aid, yeah, it's from a general kind of high level. It is year to year. You have to submit these financial aid applications each year because of that. So it's something to be mindful of. All right, guys, we're almost approaching the hour, a couple minutes left. Again, awesome questions here. Makes my job a little bit easier with these great questions. And again, just to, reiterate, we're going to be having these office hours. There's still a few between, the time that this bill has to be paid. So, if you're still feeling a little uneasy or things like that, it's going to start to get a little bit more clear as we move forward. And if, questions do bubble up, we'll be able to address them 2 weeks from now. And again, that's still plenty of time to execute strategies. Well, thank you, anonymous attendee. I appreciate that feedback. I'll give it a few more minutes here. I'm assuming from, the majority, if not all the questions that came through, that the bulk of our attendees today were class of 2021, and that's totally fine. But for any class of 2022s or underclassmen, certainly fire away at any questions here in the last couple of minutes. Big shout out and congratulations to Susan. Thank you for sharing. Her daughter Jenna graduates from Boulder today. So huge congratulations there. Dual major in chemical engineering and applied math. Whoa, baby. That's quite impressive and an accomplishment. So big congratulations to you. And that's probably a good segue into wrapping this puppy up here. Again, a huge congratulations not only to your son, your daughter, at kind of getting to the end here and finding their school. But to you as mom and dad, this college journey is quite an experience, quite a roller coaster. And so a big accomplishment for all you folks as well. So unless there's any other questions here, I'm going to go ahead and tie a bow on it. Again, we'll be sending out this recording. Any questions that pop up and you don't want to wait until the next office hours, pop them in the community, and we'll get them addressed there. But appreciate everybody. Thank you for the questions. And unless I see another question kind of pop through here in the next 30 seconds, I'll go ahead and wrap this puppy up. All right, everyone. I think we're looking good here. So again, grateful for you. Wishing you the best. Stay safe. Stay happy. And we'll be seeing you soon here.